Hi guys, thanks for coming. We're going to talk about summarizing reading comprehension selections to build their skills. So welcome to our PLC group. All right, so doing some introductions of things. Went through and did some research about reading comprehension, how it's incredibly vital for student success. If a student can't read, then they can't really function, especially when they get to the high school level. We see a lot of the students who are very behind, and that's usually because they can't read up to the level that they are supposed to. So working on their comprehension skills need to be worked on every year, some shape or fashion. And our NWEA testing gave me a really good baseline for the data to see which students really struggled and which students are at level but just choose not to perform on these tests, which we all know happens very regularly. So, took 5 weeks, and I worked with, there was 94 students. They all had to opt in for me to be able to use their information, which is just their data on that. So obviously we have more sophomores than that, but those were the only ones that allowed me to use their data. So we basically gave them some reading comprehension activities. So they'd have a selection to read, and then they'd have questions to answer, and then we would do different modalities of that in class. So I would read, they would answer, some would read, then we do the popcorn, move around, things like that. They do some on their own. So they kind of had a different feel for different types of reading comprehension, and it allowed the students, if they were not great readers, to be able to not feel like they were put on the spot, that everyone was taking their fair share in their turn. Okay, so research question. So what's the effect of summarizing reading selections to build reading comprehension skills within the English language arts classrooms? So, like we stated, reading comprehension skills are necessary. It doesn't matter what class that they are in, they have to be able to read, they have to be able to understand, they have to be able to reiterate that information in order to be productive, especially in a high school setting. And we know that all of our students are not college bound, but listening to directions, being able to read signs and directions in a workplace and to comprehend those meanings matter. They need to be able to do those things safely. So we had 94 students in the world cultures classes that allowed me to use their data. We started out with a pre-test, one that was developed in one of the old literature books, and I gave them a printed copy of the reading selections, but I put the questions on Canvas so it automatically graded. So they had a little technology, and then they had a little paper pencil type thing, so it kind of evened that out a little bit. When we did multiple selections in between, most all the selections were history based. So when we talked about Napoleon, we had some reading comprehension selections that talked about Napoleon. So it was giving the students more information about the topics that we talked about. So we're in Scottsburg, Indiana, grade 10. We had 34 Caucasian males and 1 African American male that consisted of our group, 58 Caucasian girls and 1 Asian girl that made up our group. We worked on this 3 times a week for 25 minutes of a class period, and we did this for 5 weeks. So within those 5 weeks, we did a pre-test and a post-test and all kinds of things in between. So it kind of gave me a good baseline, and then after that 5 weeks was when we took the last NWEA test. So it was kind of neat to see some of those scores. All right, so in my research, used some of these authors and basically looked at some English language learners The ESL students need to know the basics of English in order to understand what they are actually reading. If English is not a first language for them, it's hard for them to work on English activities, especially in a high school when that's not their first language. So I looked at a lot of that. And then Crabtree and Albert, Morgan, and Conrad, they talked about being compliant with IEPs. Now, obviously, I know we all have students with IEPs. We all are compliant to them. But at the high school level, it's more, does the student want those accommodations? They usually ask. Even though, you're supposed to give it to them, some do not want them. They want to be treated like everyone else. But when it comes to their reading successes, they almost always need to have those accommodations given to them at some point in time. And then another article was about having mastery in vocabulary, being able to know the words that the students are reading. Students can read over a lot of things, never understand what they're reading if they have no idea what the words mean. So that was, when I started reading that was when we started really talking about using vocabulary.com, and that was really helpful for a lot of the students. It was kind of neat to see a lot of the students realize that they didn't know everything, that they didn't know these vocab words, that there are other words besides what is on Snapchat or their autocorrect on their phones. And then another author, McCallum et al., talked about visualizing the text. Reading, can they picture what they're reading? Can they connect it to something real world? I know a lot of students struggle, in history and science and math with reading because they can't picture, reading something about World War II, being on the battlefield, things like that. But I know we do a great job of showing videos, that kind of gives them that real world experience, even though they're not going to go back to the 1940s to be a part of World War II, but they can kind of see that real world experience. And then just some other ones, obviously we know reading is important. You should read every day. Doesn't matter what you read. Reading helps build your brain. Your brain's a muscle. It helps exercise it. And then, students need to learn how to reference back to the text. They have questions, especially on iStep, that reference straight back to the text. Students have no idea how to go back. They have no idea how to correlate those things. So that was really important too. And then just using different modalities like KWL charts, like what do they already know? What do they need to know while they're reading this? And then at the end, what did they learn? Did they learn anything? Because if they're not, then we didn't do a good job with that. And then Sulik down here, when I was reading all of this author's article, said you needed to have some prior knowledge in order to understand. Well, that's right. However, not a lot of students are going to know about Napoleon before they get to world history. They have an idea, they've heard Napoleon before, but having that prior knowledge isn't really there just yet for our students, but having those skills to be able to figure out what they are reading is what they need to work towards. Okay, so different activities that we did. We had lexical glossing, we had story mapping, we had different reading selections, gave students more time, did some closed reading techniques. With all those things, I modeled a lot. I let some students model and try to perfect that. And then I let the students kind of out on their own to see if they could function doing some of those things. And some of it was a little touch and go. Okay, so data collection, we've already went over the specifics of the students. So the students were given a pretest. The pretest was quite long. Given the scores of the pretest, I would probably assume that the students went through and clicked answers. Even our really great students that I know were very capable of reading these things and answering questions did not do well. So I figured that they just, went through and clicked. So after the pretest, the students were given multiple selections to read. They all had different multiple choice questions or some extended responses. Sometimes, having an extended response is better for some of the students because it takes them a little bit to figure out how to put that answer into words, and be able to explain their point. Other times they need that multiple choice to have those 4 choices to say, okay, well, I'm pretty sure I've read this, so let me just check that if they have no idea. So they spent the first 20 minutes of each class period 3 times a week working on some of these things. All the collection methods were qualitative due to the grading of the answers, and they were right or wrong, and then the material was graded on Canvas. So student data was kept on a password-protected computer. The parents signed consent forms for me to be able to use their data. Canvas was used, so I'm the only one that has the password to log into our specific class, so their data was not released to anybody in any shape or form. All right, so the results. Okay, so I have first and second period. Our first block class, their pretest average was 44%. Their post-test was 78%. So they had a huge climb there. And then our second block class had an average of 25% for their pretest, and the post-test 67%. And that's really great for the students that are in there. That group is our lower group of students academically. They tend to struggle a lot more with everything. Didn't matter what we've given them this year, they tended to struggle. So the scores drastically raised due to the reading comprehension activities. So first period consisted of the 34 females and 13 males. The female scores were better than the males on the pre and post test by 60%. 20 of the females and 7 males are categorized as free and reduced in their socioeconomic status. For our second block, we had 25 females and 12 males, and the females score better than the males by about 55%, and 10 females and 6 males are on free and reduced in that class. All right, so here's a nice chart about our pre and post test. So pre-test for our first period here, they were about 45%, and then the post-test, they were up in 78% or so, and then the second block, you can tell that they did not score as well compared to first period on their pre-test or even on their post-test, but they did score well compared to their actual scores. There was an increase in that. Okay, so this is just a timeline of things we did week by week. We did the pre-test, and then we read different articles like about Napoleon, expanding public education. We talked about technology. We talked about Anne Frank and different things because that was in the news recently on their investigating that again. Tried to really get some interesting things that were new that they could, that they would have a better chance at actually wanting to read. And obviously there's some, nice classic stuff in here that they will need to read based upon ISTEP material. So here's all the reading comprehension activities. They're listed first period, then the second block class for each of them. So the common theme was that first period, the first block class, always scored a lot higher than the second block class. And like I said, that was our lower academically achieving class anyway, so it really didn't surprise me. So all the work was all out of 20 points, or some of them were out of 10, but not many. So a lot of students did quite well on those activities. A lot of them were multiple choice. There were a few that were short answer, so the students were able to have that different type of function that they could use. All right, so like I said, the study lasted 5 weeks. It was completed once upon completion, a post-test was administered on Canvas. The grades from the pre to the post-test greatly increased. Grades on reading comprehension assignments were very good throughout the 5 weeks of practice, and the students made a significant impact on their learning through reading. So, the reading comprehension skill scores were based on NWEA data, which led me to want to practice this within the room. There were pre, post tests that were administered over the 5-week period. Most of all the pre-test scores were very, very low, which I expected, because I expect most of our students not to take things seriously until they realize, oh, we have to do something to have an outcome, so now we're going to try. So the multiple choice questions had higher scores than the extended response. I had a lot of students with the extended responses that did not answer them, just because they did not want to actually write out an answer, just because they were lazy. And then the post scores were after 5 weeks of the reading selections, and they went up drastically. So sharing with this, our PLC group. And here's some of the references that I used. So, if you guys have any questions?
I have a question.
Okay.
Did you share this information with the students as far as how they did and how they progressed, and what was their response to their progress?
Okay. So we talked about the pretest scores being incredibly low. We talked about, what their scores were based upon their work in class, because they all got a grade for it. The assumption was if they didn't opt into letting me use their data, that they didn't have to do the work. Well, they were really wrong. It was a class activity, so they still got a grade for it, and they did well on those. And then I showed them a little graph of their pre-test scores to their post-test scores, and they could see that growth. And then when we talked about their individual NWEA data, they could see their growth from the second test to the third test.
I have a question. There was a slide where you had the different activities like the close and the scaffolding and story mapping. Were there any of those that were more successful, or the students liked more so than the others? I mean, with some that,
Yeah. I feel like the students did a lot better with the closed reading activities because they're used to doing a lot of that. They've had it modeled for them. And then the story mapping, they did really well with those. They like trying to pick out different parts and put it where they think that it should go. So it kind of gave them a little bit of ownership as to how that article really went, or how they thought it should go, and things like that. Okay.
It was obvious that the ladies scored better in both the pre and the post test. You think it would be a legitimate follow-up study to this to find a way to engage males more in reading?
I think that it would be a good thing to figure out why the male students didn't do so well. A lot of it, I think, is they are too occupied trying to play on their phones or trying to listen to their music while instruction's going on. As sophomores, the boys are a lot more immature than girls. The girls tend to have a better head on their shoulders as to what they want to do in 2 years when they graduate. The boys have not really thought that through just yet. I don't think that they're incapable of these things. I just think that they are lazy and don't want to do these things. And they're okay with the girls outscoring them until it comes to senior year. But it would be worth trying to figure out, if the boys are really struggling that much more, or if they are really just that much more lazy.
Not as engaged.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, does anybody else have anything we need to talk about or discuss?
I have one more question, please.
Okay.
When you talked about the free and reduced lunches, and I might have missed that, but how close was that, or was that related to the initial reading levels versus, did it have an effect on where the students started?
I don't think it did. I think all the students, it didn't matter on their socioeconomic status whatsoever on how well they did on the pre-test versus the post-test. I had to look at that data, but it was more male versus female on the data, not so much the free and reduced versus students who paid. I didn't see much difference in any of that. A couple percentages here and there, which wouldn't really amount to anything.
Not substantial.
It wasn't substantial.
Potentially one last question.
Okay.
Of all the reading selections that you made, is there any of those that you picked out specifically, 2 or 3, that you thought were most effective?
I really liked the reading selections from the Scholastic magazines that we get. The students really enjoyed having those articles that are fresh and, in the news, like the Anne Frank. They were like, oh, well, she's dead. She's been dead for a long time. Like, we read Diary of Anne Frank in middle school. Why are we reading this? But it was new. Like, they were investigating, how they could have been found. So that was something neat that they already had some knowledge of, and then, they're still trying to figure out, what happened to them. So it was neat for the students to see that. And then there was another article about rehabilitating rhinos from one area in Africa to another because people are killing them for their horns because they think there's medicinal value in those, which is really not true. Most cultures don't think that, but so, it was kind of neat for them to think about those things because that had been a news article and they'd seen it on the news and things like that. Well, thank you guys so much for coming and for helping and let me present this in our PLC.